Imagine a society where crime and unrest have eroded the very systems we rely on. A world where the rule of law has failed, where organized gangs target food trucks, and hijackings have driven our once busy roads into silence. In the shadow of this instability, food and basic goods can no longer reach the smaller towns and communities that need them most. Without reliable access to essentials, shopping centers have become empty husks. In their place, markets have arisen, improvised, raw, and sometimes ruthless, run by both gangs and the communities they serve. In these areas, the currency isn't the rand or even the dollar, but rather what you can trade: food, fuel, skills, and services. Welcome back to Off-Grid Survival South Africa. My name is Grant, and today, Brett and Ben will be dropped into a reality that feels closer each day. A world where the rule of law has failed. Today they are challenged to explore how a barter economy takes root in this chaotic landscape, where trust is rare and survival means rethinking every resource you have. Let's discuss what it would take to navigate and survive in a barter-driven economy in the wake of societal collapse.
Good morning, Brett. As you heard, we have been challenged to discuss how we would handle this scenario.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a very interesting scenario, and I think something that is definitely worthwhile us diving into. In countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe, Somalia, those sort of countries where rule of law has broken down, and the first thing to happen is that a barter economy springs up. So how would we handle something like that in South Africa, do you think?
It is an interesting scenario, and the barter system is an interesting thing to get into, because even in countries where they have rule of law, but where people aren't very trusting in their economy or the value of the currency, people have gone into bartering system so that they're not having to worry about exchanging money, but building an economy that can survive a collapse.
Yeah, it comes down to that you are protecting your family, as we've discussed on many occasions.
Yes.
Protecting those closest to you, whether that's your mutual assistance group or your family. And what do you need to do to survive? And you're not going to be able to prep for every eventuality. And you're not going to be able to prep all the different foodstuffs you're going to need. What's going to happen 6 months down the line when you've finished your tinned food and you've finished your buckets of flour and rice and that sort of thing? And you now have to go into market and start bartering for food or for tools or for stuff that you need to improve your life. You quite often hear guys talking about, are you going to thrive or are you going to survive?
Yes.
And I think with proper planning and prepping, you can thrive as opposed to survive.
Yeah. Bartering is a skill that you have to learn, and it's more often than not developed when you go to flea markets, second-hand shops, car boot sales, that type of thing, where you get into a rhythm of being able to not drive the price down ridiculously, but learn when is a good time to say, do you have a better price for me? Or, can I get a better price? Or look at the product. And the whole thing about bartering is you don't lie about a product, but you can definitely bring out the flaws that are in the product,
So just to start with, in this scenario, there is no cash. Whether it's the rand or the dollar, paper money, fiat currency is out the window. And people are literally trading one item for another.
Yeah.
So what people need to understand is that you going to the stall of a guy that's got spices, for instance. He's got salt and turmeric and ginger and that sort of thing that he's either stored or grown himself. What does he need? He doesn't need the pair of shoes that you've come to barter with necessarily.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets really tricky. And what will happen in some scenarios is that you will have a market currency for that particular market. So maybe there you go in and there's a list when you walk in that a pair of tackies in good condition is worth 10 stone, just for instance. And a kilogram of salt is worth 50 stone. So now you've got an exchange rate as such. And creating an exchange rate is probably the hardest part. And that's where having people running the market, running the environment is important, and not just a free fall.
Yeah, but that is still trying to develop an economy. The basic form of bartering is you have spice, I have tackies.
Yeah.
I come to you and say, can I buy spice for this, in exchange it for these tackies? And you go, no, I don't want tackies, although it's not my size. And you say, okay, what are you interested in? And you go, oh, you know what? I need a teaspoon and a knife and fork.
Yeah.
And it must be this size. That's what you're looking for. So I walk around the market, find somebody who's wanting to trade me for the tackies for what I'm looking for, or maybe a few other things that, if I can get a good trade. So I walk away with a teaspoon, knife and fork, and maybe a pair of socks. Come back to you and exchange the teaspoon and a knife and fork for the products I'm looking for. So you find the people that you need to get the items you need to get the end result. Eventually, if the world has gone to a point where you've been able to develop tokens, so say that market was Buffalo Bay market, everybody from the surrounding area hiked in to avoid all the gangs on the roads or whatever else, and snuck in at the dead of night, and then they started bartering. They would have the token from the last time they were, or maybe they have no tokens because they've never been there before. So they find somebody who's willing to give them a token or 2 or 5 or whatever for the shoes that they're going to barter. Now they have got a form of currency. And that's where the money originally came from, where I think I've seen a lot of different, in the UK, I think it was London, they had each different place had a token that held value but only there. And what we know as currency is basically an agreed upon,
it's a promise,
token that gave everything the same value as such. So say a rand was, at the Buffalo Bay market was 2 tokens, but the George market was actually 1.5 tokens. When we moved to the rand, it just equalized everything out.
Yes.
And so we had a unified way of gauging value. And that's where the old gold things,
the gold standard,
Yeah.
So from a preparedness point of view, what could we do now that would benefit us in this situation 2 years down the line after something like this has happened, and we are now in this barter economy, and you need food, or you need maybe a warm jacket, winter's coming, and your clothes have worn out, or your stuff got stolen, or something has happened. So what stuff could we stockpile now, or what could we do now to benefit us in that hypothetical scenario in the future?
Well, I can tell you what, if everyone that bought out all the toilet rolls have kept them dry, they will have a built-in cash supply while it lasts, because they'll probably be able to sell it per square. Do the whole army method,
Yeah.
But it's everything that you want to collect now. People go, oh, okay, you need to go out and buy 50 spades and a whole bunch of axes and all that type of stuff just in case. And it's expensive, and you never know. You might have had to leave all your barter items. With bartering, the biggest thing you need to prepare is your mind. Develop the skill. Develop the know-how, the savvy to be able to get the best price out of something. Some people are so shy to say, is there a bit of wiggle room in that price? I would like to buy it, but it's impacting my wallet a little bit too much. And oftentimes you can do that even in big stores. They often have a margin that they can discount you. And depending on how well you deal with the salesperson, you might be able to get a bit of leeway there. Also, with the volume that you might be able to. But the most a person can say to you is, no, sorry, we don't give discount. Yeah. Obviously, if you go in there like a complete one of those people.
Novice.
No, I was thinking more like,
a little bit Karen.
Not quite a Karen, but if you go in like a pompous bubble, you're going to get the response that type of person would normally get. But if you go in wanting to learn, but also wanting to try and get the best deal, but obviously not trying to do the seller in, then you're going to get the best out of it. And obviously, if you're going to a market, now we're in this scenario, if you're going to a market, now I'm going to a market, and Brett's there, and he's selling his carrots. And I know Brett's a brilliant farmer, and this week he has carrots, and next week he might have pumpkins or something. I don't want to press Brett to the point where he doesn't want to do business with me again. I want to get the wiggle room out of his price so that I can get a good deal, but he walks away happy. Because if that happens, he's willing to do business with me again. So we get into a good relationship where eventually we know that when Brett is there and I walk up to him, he goes, you know what? Ben's going to give me a good price. And I look at Brett and go, you know what? He's not going to try and wreck me. So we eventually get to a point where we're not having to barter, even though it might be a jovial thing, just like discussion-wise. You develop those friendships, but those relationships in business. And the more a person knows you're a person of your word, that you'll keep your word, and once you've agreed on a selling price or a buying price, you do not back out.
And that's, I think, is very important. When you get to this kind of a scenario, your word is going to be gold.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to be known as a thief or a highwayman or a gangster or something like that. And if you'd start cheating people on deals, you're not going to get business. Yes. So being honest to a degree is always good. You know, a little bit of white line here and there is not a bad thing, but you've got to look after yourself as well. So if you've got items to trade, say for instance, let's say we've got ammo, something that a lot of people say they would never trade, and you've got at home 500 rounds of ammo of a caliber that you don't even have a firearm for. And in South Africa, that's technically illegal, we do know, but this is hypothetical. So you've got 500 rounds of 22 ammo, you go to the market. Don't take all your ammo with. Take 50 rounds, and this is all you've got. If people ask, this is all you've got. Never give away how much you've got of something, because then you become a target. You can get followed back home and targeted for what you might have at home.
Besides the fact you devalue your product.
That as well.
You know, if everyone's looking for cabbages and you're only selling 5 cabbages, those cabbages have value.
Yeah.
But if you suddenly have 50 cabbages, those cabbages don't have the same value because they know you want to get rid of them. So they really drive down the price. So if you go to the market and you have 5 rounds of tutu, those 5 rounds of tutu have way more value than the 50 rounds you would have taken.
Yes.
So it's also learning economy. It's the more scarce a thing is, the more value it has. And it doesn't have that value for people who aren't looking for tutu. But it has value for the people that are looking specifically for that, say, for argument's sake, tutu or cabbages or whatever. And that you've got to learn the art of selling and the value of stuff.
So that brings me to the next subject is, if you had to have a stall at a market, what would you maybe sell? What would be a good idea for people to think of now that they could almost start prepping for if the scenario did happen? And the one thing that came to mind for me was rule of law has broken down, but there's still electronic items that people use. So not everybody is going to have solar panels, for instance. What if you had at your stall some portable solar panels and some charging stations, maybe for walkie-talkies or for, cell phones? Imagine how having a charged cell phone, so you can look at old photos or watch old videos that are stored on your phone or on your iPad or whatever it is you have. how much joy that could bring a person, but they haven't been able to charge it because they don't have the facilities to do that. They're burning candles and staying warm with a fire and cooking with fire. They don't have electricity. But at your stall, you've got charging stations. You don't have anything else to trade, but they can bring their device, charge it, and then you can trade for stuff that you need.
Yes, that is a good idea because people need services. Depending what the services are, they might put a way lower value on electronic devices than on food or keeping warm. And that's where you got to look at, what do you trade? And if you, for argument's sake, have charging stations, how are you going to keep them? Because somebody has traded something for tutu. And if they walk in there with the tutu, you suddenly don't have charging stations anymore because they've taken them.
And that's where the market economy arises, is that who's running the market? What is the security of the market? Is it just an open air field where everybody rocks up on a Sunday and sets up their blanket and hopes for the best? Is there a community that's running the market? Is there a gang that's running the market? Do you have to pay essentially to be at the market? Or is it in an old warehouse or an old shopping center and you get allocated a corner? What kind of security is there? I think that's something to also think about.
Well, think about our scenario. You traveling in from Sedgefield, you've hiked down the beach through the dunes, whatever else you need to do, swim the river to get to Buffalo Bay. I've had to do similar things, avoiding all the gangs, the people roving out, trying to steal. I've had to go midnight, sneak through the dunes and the bush and everything else to get there. I don't think the market would be an organized thing till you have somebody who is strong enough to resist warlords, gangs, thieves, that type of thing. And when you have somebody that powerful, you're very beholden to them. And if they decide they don't have a charging station, they want yours, there's technically nothing you can do to stop them. So anybody big enough to give you protection can also take your stuff from you.
Yeah. So in a lot of the literature and movies and TV shows and that sort of thing, after doomsdays happen sort of thing, quite often they will picture, you'll have market scenes. And you'll normally have the big burly guard standing at the gate with his barbed wire wrapped baseball bat sort of thing. And no weapons allowed, a little locker where you got to lock your weapons up and things like that. And I know those are technically fantasy scenarios, but I think that in a real life situation, something quite similar to that is what's going to end up happening.
But who in a lawless society is willingly going to give up their weapon, their way of defense?
Yeah.
Because if you walk in, you leave your weapon there, there's nothing stopping people from, there's no law that's stopping people from taking your weapon. You're hoping and praying that the person responsible is honorable enough to allow you to take your weapon back and not just take everything from you and kill you in the market.
And that's where a lot of the trust comes into it, I think. So if you know that you can go in and as long as you don't cause trouble, you'll get your stuff back when you come out, then that's how it'll work.
But I think that'll be quite far down the road of informal markets, bartering with people you come across. So you and I walking through the dune, I meet you, we both got our hand on our firearm, our weapon, our shield, or whatever else. We discuss a bit, and then we talk about what is what and what are we willing to trade, and then we do a quick exchange and then bugger off so that we aren't tempting the other one to take the stuff that they've just bartered with.
And I think a lot of that initially is what will happen, until it becomes more formalized.
So now this is where a mag comes in. If you have a mag in your area and some of your mag is staying behind to protect the fort and the other part of your mag is going through. So one person is going into trade and the rest of the people are all armed outside, backing you up.
Yeah.
And also, then you have protection coming out of that area. Because, say, when it gets to a point where there's tokens, the tokens have more value than the cabbages, because if a person robs you of cabbages, they got to eat the cabbages now or try and sell them. But once tokens have been developed, it's the same as cash.
Yeah.
It can be exchanged for anything.
So what else could you trade?
Well, if you have an axe, there's no point trading an axe. So if you got an axe, go chop wood, trade wood, that type of stuff. One of the books I read years ago was How to Survive the End of the World as You Know It. And one of the things he says is you don't exchange a hard object for a soft object, an imperishable item for a perishable item, because with an axe you can always make firewood, but as soon as you don't have your axe, you can
no longer make firewood, yeah.
And you can't just make an axe.
Yeah.
So with an axe you can make firewood, you can make lumber, you can do a lot of things, you can build, you can have a whole craft around your tools. So you don't ever swap a tool for food. Go make something that you can swap for food.
And like you just said, having a craft or a skill set is very important. So learning carpentry, learning blacksmithing as a hobby, it's not something that you'll necessarily use now, but at some point where you now have to make a horseshoe, you know how to make a horseshoe, or you know how to make a knife, or something like that. Having a skill, even something as simple as sewing. There's plenty of people out there that have got no clue how to sew a shirt. And you knowing how to make a shirt out of old curtains could get you a loaf of bread.
Yes. And learning to tan hide, to do any of that type of stuff is useful, because it's all, the greater your skill set, the more opportunity you have, because a person might not want you to build them a cupboard or something, but they might want you to, rewire their solar panel into the system because they don't know how to do it, or something like that. And so the greater your skill set, the more value you have in that society.
If you look at like the old medieval times, if I can go that way, and you had the traveling tinker, the guy that could fix holes in pots and pans and kettles, because not everybody's got the money to buy a new one.
Yes.
He could do a little bit of leather work to fix shoes, and he knew how to make a needle, but he wasn't a blacksmith. He wasn't the guy that you would go to make weapons necessarily. But he was the guy who traveled from town to town fixing pots and pans. And that's how he made his living. And he was an essential part of the greater community.
They also be able to carry news.
Yeah.
And small barter items and stuff like that they've traded for other things. And so they come in. So it was if you have that type of skill, you do become more valued. And a lot of those people could go into different societies or different strongholds and leave again safely, because even though that person is not of your, let's call it a mag, they have a value that you need, which means you want to use them again in the future, which means it's vital that you keep them safe while they're in your district. And once they leave, they can do their thing, and when they come around again.
So we were talking about people traveling from one community to another, and there's quite an old book that I really like. It was made into a Kevin Costner movie called The Postman.
Yes.
Where he is essentially a traveling nomad, and he finds an old postal van with a dead postman in it.
Yes.
And to stay warm, he buries himself in the letters one night, and he's reading the letters, and he realizes that, he could get a lot of goodwill by rocking up at the next town dressed as the postman. So there's a bit of lying involved in it and that sort of thing. But he essentially recreates a postal system among the towns in an area. There's a lot more that goes into the story, but having a way of spreading news is a way of bartering. So it's just one of many ways of doing things, because you getting to move from town to town and see what people have got and what is available. So Sedgefield might have somebody that's really good at blacksmithing. Karratara might have guys that are really good at hunting because they're higher up in the mountains, so they've got more access to game meat. Neisner might have people that are really good at fishing and getting shellfish foraging along the shore, and having a good communication system. And as long as there aren't too many hectic roving gangs, if we can put it that way, you can still build a broader community. And I think recreating society is what a lot of this kind of thinking is about as well.
Yeah. Well, if you're strong enough, you could be one of those roving gangs, but you provide safe transport.
Yeah.
So people who are, everybody knows that on the 1st of the month, you leave Sedgefield to go to Neisner. On the 10th of the month, you go from Neisner to Karratara. On the 20th of the month, you go back down to Sedgefield, and you provide a safe route.
Basically a caravan route.
Yeah, so people go with you. You know, you're not physically transporting them. You providing security.
And that is a form of barter, because by providing security, you getting paid in most likely foodstuffs or something like that. That'll keep your group strong.
Yes. Well, whatever you might not have you might have a different requirement to what people want to provide you, or can provide you, but they need to provide you. So, say for argument's sake, your whole gang runs on cabbages, and the people don't have cabbages. They need to barter so that they can come to cabbages, because you don't want old smelly socks. No matter how pretty they are, you need cabbages, because that's everybody in your group love cabbages, you know. So it's not on you to accept stuff that you don't want to. You're providing a service, but for that, it's the same as if you were being paid in gold. You wouldn't accept silver or anything else. You want gold to move the people safely. They're going to have to pay you in that. So they're going to have to do their bartering to get you the currency that you're wanting, whether it's cabbages or gold.
Yeah,
so you're laughing at cabbages, I can see that.
Yeah, no, I'm just imagining the smell.
Gets worse as they get rotten.
Yeah, definitely. But on that subject of cabbages, for instance, so say we've got a market and you've got a skill that I know you do, which is you know how to ferment, or you've been looking into making kimchi and that sort of thing. So something like cabbage or sauerkraut, you can tell I don't know what I'm talking about here. You're way better at that stuff than I am. So you going and buying the cabbages from the guy, you can then preserve the stuff with your secret knowledge.
Well, that's the whole thing. You know, if I have that skill, I can go to the market and get all the cabbages I can and barter with somebody else to get as many of the old jars and lids I can that are not rust and stuff. And then somebody else I'm bartering to get salt. Then I go back home, do what I do, and then next time I go to the market, I'm taking sauerkraut or kimchi or something like that with, but all preserved. So I'm selling a canned good that is now got a longer shelf life. So the person who has the cabbages, he's either got to eat them or sell them. But so now I might be selling him 1 jar of preserve for 1 cabbage, but I can make 2 jars of preserve out of that cabbage, or 3 jars. But he's paying a lot of cabbage, but he's getting something he can put on his shelf for the whole year. So it's a longer shelf life product. So he's upgrading, even though it's costing him more than.
And by having that skill to make the sauerkrauts and the kimchis and that sort of thing, you will become known as a person that can do that. So next time you're at market, the cabbage seller, instead of maybe having all his cabbages at his stall, will maybe approach you and go, "Hey dude, I've got 10 cabbages. I'll trade you 10 cabbages for a jar of your kimchi." And the guy that sold you the salt will come to you with the same thing. So people will start coming to you as opposed to you having to go to them.
Yes.
But
you'll start a whole market of people looking for old jars and lids and what fits with what.
And those people will start coming to you because they know that you are the guy that can do that stuff. So that one simple skill that you've learned now could become a thriving business, essentially.
Yes. And just the same as the guy that hunts doesn't necessarily want to have to process the meat and stuff and make biltong and all that. So you get one guy specializing in making biltong, and he acquires the salt, he acquires the spices, and he does what he needs to do, and you bring him the buck, and for that buck you get a certain amount of biltong. So you can obviously cut a piece of steak out for yourself and then give the buck across, and you get a portion of that weight as payment.
Yeah.
And so, but again, everything is dependent on the value people see in it. Now, if I've been eating venison for ages and a person tries to barter with me for venison and I'm sick of it, that venison has a very low value for me. And somebody walks past and they just made a pizza, I'll swap that whole buck for a pizza because I'm like sick of that buck now. So again, different things have different values depending on the market and how saturated that market is with the product you supply. So everybody will be hunting as much as possible, and so initially that value will be very low on venison. As venison dries up, because the buck have moved or been hunted out, and hunters have to go even further down the trail to go find meat, that price will climb again. So eventually everything finds a balance point.
Yeah, definitely. And we are, of course, assuming that this is going to be more of a capitalist style barter economy as opposed to a commune style where it's for the greater good. And I think that'll be more of the initial kind of thing that happens, where you have your hunters that go out and you have your person growing your food and the community eats as a whole. But eventually it'll start, as society gets bigger again, you'll end up with more of this barter style economy.
Well, your capitalist society, I don't think initially is very useful, because in the world we live now, the only reason I can have stuff and it stay mine is because we have a government and a police force and rule of law and all that type of stuff. Otherwise, what would happen in a might is right feudal society, if I went to town to buy groceries, I'd come home and I wouldn't have a house anymore.
Yeah.
Because somebody would have taken it, which means I would have to now hire guards or have a mag. So people were like-minded. And so in that commune, so you take a mag as a commune, okay? So within that community, we each doing our job to a value. Now, obviously, a person that washes dishes has to wash a huge amount of dishes to equate to a person who has gone out, avoided gangs, fought mountain lions, whatever needs to happen to bring back the one little scrawny buck.
Yes.
Okay? Because that was really dangerous. And so you'll have to have a committee or a group of elders or somebody determining the value of stuff. So you might need to wash dishes and laundry and a few other things to be able to equate to the same value as the person that is putting their life on the line to get that little bit of meat.
So again, going back to the example of TV shows and books and that sort of thing, I always find it so ironic when the high flyers in today's world are the guys that end up without any skills, because they've been businessmen or worked on Wall Street or whatever it is, and now all of a sudden they need to learn how to grow a tomato, but they've got no clue how to do it. So the guy that knows how to grow a tomato has got more worth than the high flyer.
Yes, tradespeople have more intrinsic value in a society where everything has to be physically done.
Yeah.
When your piece of plastic accounts for nothing, doesn't mean a thing, you have no value. When your coding skills mean nothing because there aren't computers to use it, if you have the ability to build a computer, build stuff, fix stuff, take things apart and make new things, and then apply your coding skill, then you have a value.
Yes.
So you're creating your own market, as it were. So you can create the computer and code it. So for argument's sake, the world collapses. We still have cell phone towers that are standing. They need power. They still have cell phones out there. They need to be able to connect to a tower. Now the cell phone, all the cell phones you have might be MTN, and the tower that was left over is Vodacom. The two don't want to talk to each other. Do you have enough ability to make them talk to each other, make the coding work, so that you can create a local area network, basically, with local cell service, that all your cells work like a radio?
Yeah.
Now, I do not know anything about that.
Oh, neither do I. Yeah.
But the guys out there that know how to do that. They know how to do all these things. They know how to build a WLAN network, and then all those cell phones can then connect to the Wi-Fi, and then you, again, code an app so that you can have everything talk to each other. Me, I can build stuff out of steel. I can make you a knife, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
I understand the basics of it, but nothing more. So if you have that ability, now in the beginning, people are like, well, I've got radios. It's fine. But with a cell system like that, you could then get the one tower to talk to the other tower and then increase the range of it. And if you did that, you would have then intrinsic value, not only for your own mag or your own town, but neighboring towns as well, because communication is important. And as soon as it becomes more valuable than food, because food has been settled down, people are farming again, and people are growing things and harvesting and all that, then communication becomes important. And later on, after communication, all that, entertainment becomes important. But while you're starving, entertainment is not very important.
Yeah, so practical skills are very tradable.
Yes.
So like you said, you can make a knife. You're a metal worker.
I'm a toolmaker.
You know how to manipulate metal. I'm probably very dangerous if you put me into that situation. I know the very basics of it. But if you need me to make coffee or other random skills that I have.
Well, you're able to cook, okay?
Yeah.
And you're able to think processes through. So going from where you are now, you can take things and you can cook them. With the retail background, you can sell them and move it. Or I make a knife and I hand it to you and you sell it.
Yes.
Okay, so the biggest thing is most tradespeople aren't very good salespeople because it's a different skill, it's a different mindset. Okay, the patience levels are different. The ability to deal with people's bull are completely different. Okay, so there's a place for you, and what you might need to do is survive the initial change, which means you need to go from selling to doing. So it's cooking or growing or some, and you might even learn a few skills in the process. The more skills you have going into that, the easier that transition. And eventually you can build yourself a business within your mag or within your area to take the skills that weren't useful in the beginning and make them useful.
So what I did during lockdown was I've never really grown...
Make pineapple beer, yeah.
I did not make any pineapple beer.
Not? Okay.
No, I had it. Somebody gave me pineapple beer once. It was one of the most disgusting things I've ever had. I was not impressed. But that's beside the point. I did make red wine, however. But I made a point of trying to learn new skills because we had a lot of time on our hands and that sort of thing. And I had never baked a loaf of bread in my life.
Okay.
So I did the research and I baked a loaf of bread specifically using non-traditional methods.
Okay.
So if I had to... I used buckwheat for some reason. I don't know why. I think I had a bag of it that I'd been given. And I baked a loaf of buckwheat bread. And it was edible. It's not a flavor I like. Some people do like buckwheat, but I learned how to do that. I taught myself how to do that. I could go do that now again without having to go look for a recipe.
Yes.
That is a skill that I learned. Now, if I had a 20 kilogram bag of flour, I could go and make 20 kilograms of flour's worth of bread and trade it if I needed to. Obviously, I wouldn't do it all in one go, but imagine you're hungry and you come to a market and there's that smell of fresh baked bread.
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to ask a lot more for that than maybe something else. And that's because it's a skill that I learned. I also taught myself how to grow things from seed. So I took veggies that I'd literally bought at the grocery store. I seeded them out, dried the seeds, and then I went and planted those seeds. And on about 20 butternut seeds that I planted, I think I got 2 plants that actually got to flowering.
Yes.
But I knew nothing about gardening vegetables. That's a skill level on its own, fertilization and all of that stuff. It's not just a matter of plopping a seed in the ground, but it's a skill that you learn. And if you don't learn those skills now, when SHDF happens, it's too late.
Yeah, I'll have to make a lot of knives and forks and whatever for the farmer, because the only way anything survives around me is if I put the seed in the ground and I walk away and I leave it. Because if I care for it, it dies. So I'm really not a grower.
But you're really good at food preservation. You've done, as we discussed last time, you've done smoked meats, you've done bacons, you've done that sort of thing. So that is a skill that you have that I don't have. So everybody has different skills, and the skill becomes the tradable thing. So I know how to grow veggies now. I can grow butternut. I grow 5 butternut. I keep 3 for myself because I'm going to eat those, and I've got 2 for trade. That's something I can trade with.
Yeah, but now here comes the thing. You have butternut to trade now. Is it good to trade them, or is it good to process some stuff and then trade that so that you're not trading your seed? Because what you want to do is harvest all the seed, dry it and replant. Because remember, if you trade a whole butternut, they have a seed and your supply gets
Diluted.
Very much diluted. You know, because why would a person want to buy something if they can grow it themselves? And so those are things to look at as well.
So I think what you'll see, what will start happening is that not everybody's going to grow food. Not everybody's going to be able to grow food. They don't have the correct soil type or the knowledge or whatever. So you'll have a segment of the population that will be essentially the farmers.
Yes.
But then you'll have a segment of the population that are the blacksmiths and the tool makers. And the tool makers don't have time to grow food because they're busy making tools. So that, and I think that's how an economy of needs will develop.
Within a mag, there can be a lot of cross-pollination like that. But outside that mag, you have to retain your value, and it's all about power. And that's why a lot of the trades and stuff back in the day, you used to apprentice under that tradesman, okay? And that journeyman used to teach you his trade and his secrets that no one else knew.
Yep.
So that skill you have has value, because if everybody knew it, it would have no value.
That's it.
So if you knew exactly what it took to make butternut grow 100% all the time, you don't tell anyone. That has an incredible value, more so than the butternut. And when you teach somebody and they become an apprentice under you, and you teach them that skill, that secret, that has to stay a secret. And people used to really protect those secrets because therein lay the value.
Well, that's how the guilds developed.
Yeah.
That's how you ended up with the Blacksmiths Guild and the Freemasons, essentially, and that sort of thing. It was the like minds hoarding that knowledge and building on that knowledge and using that as a power base.
Well, the guilds we have nowadays are not the same as the guilds
of old. Yeah.
Of old, the guilds of old. If you were in that guild and you shared any knowledge of that guild, that was it.
Yeah. Well, you had guilds that ran entire cities.
Yeah.
Where it was a city became known for glass making or metalsmithing or whatever.
Yeah. And it's important, and that comes down to your OPSEC side of things. You need people to specialize in certain things, security and all that. Doesn't mean people aren't involved. I hate it in movies where you always have this part of the population in an end of world scenario. Everything is broken down, and then you have certain people like, oh no, I'm a pacifist. I can't fight the aliens. Aliens are killing all of us, but I can't fight because I can't pick up a gun and I can't do this. It's like, dude, then you do not belong in our society. Go out and wave a peace flag at them or something like that. But you're a drain on the society that you're in if you're not willing to be 100% part of that society. And if it is defense, then you need to be 100% part of that society. You can have other skills. You don't have to specialize in defense or security, but you need to be 100% part of the society, which means if you need to defend, everyone is involved.
Yeah.
Male, female, children, opas, whatever. You have a part to play. Even if you can't carry a pitchfork or an axe or something like that, or a firearm, you can carry messages. You can run water to the front line, or all those type of things, so if we understand that within our mag, when we say a mag, the mag can extend to a whole town
Community. Yeah.
within our mag, everyone has to play a part of it. And you can't say, well, I'm the chef, I can't defend the town. Well, dude, if the town's being under attack, yes, people need to eat, but it doesn't help if the town gets taken.
Yeah, and that in itself is a skill. So learning, we've discussed this before, learning self-defense, knowing how to handle a firearm. Even if you don't own a firearm, at least knowing how to handle one is a skill.
Yes.
So again, we get back to the market story. You're at a market and there's a person that's got maybe firearm parts for sale.
Yeah.
And you're not a gun person yourself, but you know that back at home, our gunsmith is looking for a certain type of spring. Having certain knowledge, basic knowledges are very important.
Well, that's where eventually people will specialize. So you will have a trader that goes doing all the trading. You're not going to send your chef to go do the trading, or the person who's doing your preservation or your hunt or something, because if they get taken, you lose that skill. So what you do is you create all the products, and the person who specializes in trading, he goes and trades, or she goes and trades.
Yeah.
And they trade and they come back. So everybody will say, okay, well, I need 2 firearms, or I need a blank piece of steel, this thick that I need to make. And that's what they go look for.
Essentially a shopping list.
And their trade is keeping a straight face, being able to barter to the nth degree to get the best price and the best, most profitable trade terms for what they're giving, so they get the most back. And so, yes, that eventually we start getting back to our buyer-seller type scenario that we have in a civilized society. And that eventually we progress to that point. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to learn those skills now. Because you don't know now if things that happen tomorrow, you might be the best person for a trader position eventually.
Yeah.
Because you might take to it, even though you've never done it before, you might take to it very easily.
So my recommendation to people would be learn skills you can, get a hobby that involves maybe primitive skills, leather work or something like that, or even baking bread. That can become quite a lucrative hobby. But we have plenty of markets in South Africa already, formalized markets, that you can go to, craft markets and that sort of thing. Go visit those markets. Go visit those car boot sales. See what people are selling now. And practice your haggling skills.
Yeah. And learn to spot a fake.
Don't be obnoxious.
Yeah.
But, look at what deals you can find. We were at a market this morning. I wasn't there long. I whipped around and there wasn't really anything there for me today. But sometimes there is stuff, and I will then start negotiating with the guy. Okay, cool, you want 200 Rand for this pulley. I'll give you 150. And you'll either say no, not always in those terms, or he'll go, okay, no, what about 180? And then you go, I'll give you 160. And you negotiate and learn. That is a skill in itself. But go out to the markets. Yes, when you go to more of a craft market sort of thing, those are people that put a lot of work and a lot of effort into that stuff. And they're not really going to negotiate with you on price, and some of them might get quite offended if you do that. But look at how the market is laid out. Look at what people are selling. Yeah, just learn.
Well, like you said, some people might get offended. And then is to reevaluate. Nowadays, who cares if they get offended? Okay. You need to figure that how to approach people now so that when the situation demands that you be successful, you can't afford to offend anyone.
Yep.
So if you go to a craft market, you don't like, I want a discount. Is there a bit of wiggle room in there? I see you've made a really beautiful piece. It's so nice and thing, but it's just a little bit out of my price range. Are you able to adjust it a little bit for me? And so then you're not telling them their stuff is worthless.
Yes.
You want it cheaper. What you're saying is, I value it tremendously, but I just don't have that value with me to be able to give it to you, give you what it is actually worth. Are you able to come to my level and drop it to my level so that I'm able to get it and appreciate it? And if you have that type of mentality, people are way more willing to give you leeway than if you go, I demand a discount.
Yeah.
You see me, I come here all the time, I want discount. No one's going to give in to you. Well, unless the person really is trying to. And when you're haggling, you go, yes, Brett, I like that box. I see you wanting $200 for that box. Are you negotiable on the price of that box? The guy's like, yeah, Brett's like $150. I'm like, that's definitely a better price. But I noticed there's, it's really scratched and the corners are dented. Are you able to work with me a bit on that? It's going to take me a bit of money to fix that. We're using a box. I'm looking at a freaking Zoom podcast mic box, just using an example. But you don't try and devalue the worth in a sense. You are bringing attention to stuff, but not saying the product is useless or worthless or something like that. You being honest about it. But the same is if you have a product you are selling and a person that you like, oh, by the way, there is a crack in this thing, be honest about it. If people know that you're honest about your stuff, so you're not selling a plugged nickel or something like that, basically what they used to do is take a thing and it had a hole in it and then they put a plug in that wasn't
the same metal,
and then try and flog it, or in the old days you had to put a piece of wax in the pot or something and then make it look like it's useful, and then you go and use it and the wax melts and everything drains out of your pot. So there were ways of cheating people, and you mustn't be that type of cheat.
Yeah. So also, if you are a seller, know the value of your product, but be willing to negotiate. Being hardball and maybe overpricing might mean that you don't sell anything. Whereas going in with a fair price, but being open to negotiation means that you might actually get rid of all of your stock and you don't have to carry that home.
Yeah.
One of the worst things would be having fresh produce, and now that comes the end of the day and now you go, oh, no, I've got to drop the price.
Yes.
Because you don't want to carry all that stuff home. So you've sat the whole day, you've made no money. All the best barters have happened earlier in the day. But at the same time, as a buyer, when is the best time to come to the market? Later in the day when guys are trying to get rid of stuff and you can haggle harder. So there's many strategies involved.
Yeah, it all depends if you like your product fresh or not. So if it's perishable item, you want to be there in the cool of the day and see. Even if you're not buying or spending, actually getting the product, you see what's available. The problem about going in later in the day, you only get the rotten stuff, the stuff that's turning, the stuff that's damaged. You don't have a choice. So if you're buying, be there early. If you're a seller, go to the market when the people you think who are most likely to buy it are there.
Yeah.
If you're there early, you've got a lot more leeway on your clientele. But when you're selling, know what is your absolute minimum price you need to cover costs, to cover everything. And then you can put a 1-2 price on it. and then you know what your range is. So if you know that you have to have 100 Rand and you market at 200 Rand or 175. So people don't like 200 Rand, you market at 199.99. And the guy comes to you as, oh yeah, that, how about 125? You're like, yes, I can do 150, eh? And I'd say, he's like, oh well, you've just dropped it almost 50 Rand.
Yeah.
And then now you're still way over your 100 Rand price, but you're able to drop it down a lot so the guy feels like it's worthwhile.
He's getting something, yeah.
But not down to, because if you drop it down to 110, that guy's going to haggle you lower than what your absolute minimum needs to be.
The important thing is always having a minimum price and not going below it. So if you've got a 200 Rand product on your table and the lowest I can go on that product is 100 Rand, when you start negotiating, don't go straight to that price. Always try and get a bit more. That's business. That's general business sense. But yeah, also I was thinking just now, going back to the story about preservation and stuff like that. At the end of the day, when people are trying to get rid of stuff, maybe because something, the apple's got a blemish on it and nobody's wanted to buy it because they've become fussy eaters all of a sudden, you can go in and buy those at a cheaper price. And then maybe you've got a solar dehydrator back at the homestead, or a way of, like we said earlier, making kimchi or sauerkraut,
jam or anything.
Yeah. So look for those bargains, if I can put it that way, and go make product with stuff that you can then maybe resell. It might not necessarily be something that you need. You've gone to the market, you've bartered for everything you need, but you see the stuff at a really good price. Don't not buy it because you don't need it. Think of what you can make with it that will benefit you later on.
Well, you take apples. Now, a whole bunch of apples, there's excess and a whole bunch of sting marks on the apples, and they're not the nicest looking or tasting apples. You can take it home, you can make apple cider, and you can make apple cider vinegar. And now apple cider vinegar can be used for a variety of things. And so you're getting a really good price on those apples, not having to ferment the good apples that you have at home, but you use these ones, and then you're getting a barterable product as well.
But again, we keep coming back to this. This is what having a mag and knowing what the people in your group are capable of.
Yes.
Because I've got no idea how to make apple cider. But Johnny might be the ex-computer guy, but man, apple cider is like his pet passion. And me going out to go and do the bartering and stuff and seeing those apples and going, hey, Johnny could make some really cool apple cider there.
Yeah.
And
well, even being able to pull the sugars out of things.
Yep.
And so make it and extract sugars, crystallize the sugars, and be able to sell that, because in an end of worlds, sugar sounds easy, but if you actually go into producing crystallized sugar like we know, it's actually pretty difficult.
So the one thing we haven't got into is luxury items, and sugar would become a luxury item.
Yes.
Sugars, honeys, tobacco. Knowing how to grow tobacco, I think, would be, because you're still going to have smokers. And anything that can be used as a luxury item, whether it is alcohol, drugs, legal or otherwise, at that point, whatever you can grow that people want. People will spend money on stuff they want but don't need.
Yes. It becomes a difficult scenario because, like, say, for argument, tobacco. You can't take a cigarette, plant it, and suddenly have a tobacco drink.
No.
So, which means you need to already start thinking about it. If you want to plant illicit plants and grow it, most of them you aren't able to own
definitely
now.
not, yeah.
And even having seeds is a problem. So how would you prep ahead of time? Which means you would need to stage a raiding party into a field where that's from time before, where it's now growing wild and everyone's forgotten about stuff. And again, it's hard to discuss that type of thing because
of the legalities of it.
Yes, the legalities of now. It's like, how do you get ammo? How do you get firearms? How do you get any of these things? There are ways and means to do it, but it's very difficult to discuss that type of stuff on a podcast where we're not in that environment at the moment.
Yeah.
And we can be held liable for the advice we give when it comes to that.
So, and that's where it comes to, so talking about tobacco, it comes back to having stockpiles of stuff before collapse happens.
Yes.
So I don't smoke. I used to smoke. I no longer smoke. However, I have got cigarettes and cigarette paraphernalia, rolling papers and that sort of thing in my prep, because I know that in a situation where a collapse happens, I can go and I can take a single cigarette and we've discussed this before, giving a cigarette to a security guard makes that security guard your friend, because that dude hasn't had a smoke in ages and he's like really gagging for a smoke. Think about things like that as well. You mentioned earlier salt.
Yeah.
Salt is an item that everybody should be stockpiling. And spices or if you're going to be doing any kind of preservation, you're going to use salt.
Yeah. Well, that also depends on where you are. Stockpiling salt at the coast is difficult because it absorbs moisture.
Yeah.
And also, it might not have the value you think it has because you're at the coast. You got the sea and you can dehydrate, you can crystallize salt out of the salt water. So in the Karoo, salt has a tremendous value for your livestock as salt licks and all that other stuff there. So if you were in the Karoo or should I say, if you're at the coast and you were able to develop a trade route with the people in the Karoo, you would have a tremendous amount of power in the selling of that salt. So when the venison in your area runs out, you could have a good trade with wild meats from the Karoo side out here, because there's less people in the Karoo compared to at the coast. But we have more salt here than in the Karoo, so we can do a good trade that way.
But yeah, so definitely. And then general spices. So we've all got a little spice rack somewhere in our kitchen, but how many people prep spices? So I've got a couple of boxes where I've got all different spices vacuum sealed and going. We as a society have developed a taste for spicy food, especially here in South Africa. Everything's got some kind of chili or chakalaka or something in it. Spice can be also used to hide a multitude of sins. Whether the meat's not, that fresh, you spice it up and nobody notices.
Yes.
And flavor brings happiness. If you've got things like cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg, these things don't last forever. But having a stockpile of them gives you something that you can trade a little bit of to get something.
Yeah. Well, having an inventory of heirloom seeds,
definitely,
or
yes.
any of the seeds, so they're still in the packets and you can vacuum pack them or do what you need to do to preserve them. Even if you've had them for a long time and you only get a 10% yield out of the things because they're so old, look for seeds that will create plants that produce seeds you can use. Because a lot of fresh veggies out there, you might be able to grow from those seeds, but they might not produce seeds again or viable seeds. So that's where it comes into, get yourself a seedling tray, buy seeds, plant them, see about them. The worst that can happen is they die.
Yeah.
And you just keep planting. Coriander is one of the things that, funny enough, we use a lot of for biltong, coriander and black pepper. And it's one of the flavors we know as South Africans. And so if you can plant coriander seeds is the byproduct, or the product that we get out of it, but also coriander leaves. In America, they call it cilantro. So you can use that in salads. You can add it to your rice to flavor it, and you can make a really nice tasting basmati rice or something like that. So again, like Brett was saying, you're adding flavor to things. You can then take fresh coriander leaves and you can trade it. You can dry it
Yeah.
and trade it. You can take coriander seeds and you can trade it. You can then again it comes to how much power do you want to hold. So it might be grind the coriander and then trade it.
Yeah.
So learn your marketing side of things. What do you want to be able to share, and what secrets do you want, and what abilities do you want to retain in your mag. And so a person can go long into all the things we can do. And
Well, there's so much. Everything is a skill. Everything is something that we need to learn now. I think that's what we can take away from this.
recycling might be one of those things. And at the moment we think of recycling as like, ugh. But if you become one of those people that can get people to collect old cool drink bottles, the plastic ones. And I've watched a few things online where the guys make brooms out of the plastic and rope and all that type of stuff. So now you have that skill, that knowledge, and you get people to bring you bottles and you trade them stuff. Or they go out and they sell brooms and you get the bottles back. And you have that. You can start a skill or a trade or a barter system that wasn't available in the medieval times because there wasn't something like plastic.
Yeah.
If you understand how to crack plastic so you can make fuels, you have a skill set. If you know how to do stuff that, again, wasn't available in medieval times, there's a lot of things we can do now that don't require a huge investment in time, but it requires knowledge. And you can go and access resources that weren't available 100 years ago. And you can make a living off of that, or you can produce something that you can barter with.
Yeah. Learn skills. I think that's the most important thing we can take away from this. You can only stockpile so much food, but learning how to grow more food is almost more important.
And one of the skills I think a person should learn, which is probably one of the most vital, is learn how to communicate and learn how to gather the people around you that are most beneficial and like-minded. So and create that mag. Learn that type of thing so that the more we draw together and more we understand and are able to identify that person that is only out there for their benefit versus the person that is out there for your mag's benefit. That person that will stand by you through thick and thin versus that person that cut and run the first
sign of trouble,
or difficulty. And those are skills as well, because we've been in a civilized society so long that we don't have the predator-prey ability. So when you're a predator, if you're too much of a predator and do not have a little bit of the prey instinct, you can still get taken. So if you think you're the biggest thing on the block and you aren't looking for the T-Rex, you can still get it, If you too much like the bunny and always only have the prey mentality, you don't get to take advantage of a situation when you could. So you need a little bit of both in you, but you need to develop it. And the more uncivilized a country, so if you go into Africa or South America or any of the other places where civilization isn't all pervasive, those people have a lot of the prey and the predator mentality, so they can take advantage of situations when they can, and they also have enough of wherewithal to get out of situations and realize when something is too dangerous. As civilized people, we oh no, I'm fine. There's always somebody to pull me out the fire. There's always somebody to mend my leg or stick a plaster on me or something like that. But when you don't have that, a scratch can be life-threatening.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And the people that grow up not in a civilized society understand that. So they don't go and put their finger into a place and can get bit, or they find ways around that because they don't have a respawn point or a second life or something like. We have this video game mentality that there's always a way out for us. So do you think we've tackled the challenge well?
I think we've covered it quite in depth, yes. I just really want to say a Thank you to our buddy Grant for doing the voiceover at the beginning of this and bringing us into the world of collapsed society.
Yeah, it's great.
I think that was a lot of fun. And yeah, we're going to be using his talents again.
Yeah, I think we should convince him to come on and discuss stuff with us sometime.
Yeah, definitely. And just to do a bit of housekeeping quick, Spotify is still giving us a bit of grief with the comments. You are able to leave comments. We just struggle to get the comments. It's not a one-click situation like it used to be. So comments are available on Spotify again. Please join us on Facebook and Instagram. We have been getting some emails from people as well, I believe, which is great to hear from people. Nice to know that people are out there actually listening to us.
Yes. And if you're from South Africa and you are able to leave a comment, please do. If you can't, please email us that you tried and you can't, especially if you can give us details of what system you have, because I've been in discussions with Spotify on trying to sort out this problem. It's a problem for South Africa, but they're not exactly sure why the problem exists. So if you're in a different country and you're able to leave a comment, awesome. If you're not able to and you're able to tell us which country you're from and what system you're using and that you weren't able to, maybe we can give Spotify enough information that they can actually discern what this problem is. Because I'm able to see my comments from my phone, but my computer can't see my comments.
Yeah, it's a very strange scenario.
Yes.
Also, on Spotify, you are able to give up to a 5-star review. Guys, we would love any reviews you can give us.
Like a 10.5 would be awesome.
Out of 5, yeah, that would be amazing. But anything that helps boost us with the algorithm. Unfortunately, we are at the whim of the algorithm, but the more we get people interacting, the more other people will get to see and hear what we have to say and grow our community.
That would be great.
But cool. Ben, awesome seeing you as usual.
It was wonderful seeing you too.
Lekker man. Cheers.
Cheers. Goodbye. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Off-Grid Survival. For more info and updates, feel free to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Off-Grid Survival ZA. That's it for now. We will see you next time. And always remember, be prepared.
Off-Grid Survival is a member of the South African Podcasters Guild. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and may not reflect OGS Media or the Guild's views. We aim for accuracy but cannot guarantee it. Please verify information independently. Consult professionals before acting on any advice given during these episodes. By listening, you acknowledge that we are not responsible for any damages resulting from reliance on our content. All content is provided without warranty.